Hi, thank you so much for your introduction. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, then let me share the screen really quick. Do you see the PowerPoint slide, everyone?
Yes, it's fine, clear. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let me start. Hi, my name is Hyunji. Thank you for a beautiful introduction. Right now I'm in South Korea. I'll be presenting my research titled Filial Piety as Peace Education, a case study of Buddhist resettlement program for North Korean defectors in South Korea. As you can tell from the title, this study is about how Buddhism helped North Korean defectors resettle in South Korea and how that is aligned to the purpose of peace education. And out of many values that Buddhism teaches, I focus on filial piety today, and I'll be presenting what that is and how that's connected to peace education. So let's get started. Before jumping into the study, I would like to give you guys a brief introduction about the study. So first of all, many North Korean defectors escape from the border of North Korea and China every year, and they come to South Korea. There's about approximately 300 people coming to the country, and the majority of them experience many difficulties, many social emotional pains such as homesickness, loneliness, post-traumatic disorder, or even social segregation between South Koreans and North Koreans. So this is a really big issue in the Korean peninsula. North Koreans and South Koreans, there is a tension, there is a segregation, and a lot of North Koreans suffer from that pain. In order to alleviate North Korean defectors' social emotional pain, I believe that Buddhism can play a significant role in order to heal their minds and in order to find inner peace. And I thought out of many Buddhist teachings, filial piety can play a very important role as a form of peace education. So I have 3 research questions for this study. And the first one is, as presented in this slide, how does Buddhist organization teach filial piety as a form of peace education to North Korean defectors? Number 2, how do North Korean defectors perceive filial piety as a motivation of their resettlement? And the last research question is how and in what ways filial piety is connected to the principles of peace education. So these are my research questions. And let me give you a quick background about my study. There are 3 keywords I would like to present. Peace education, of course, it's an important keyword for this study. As you all know, it's a pedagogy, movement, and theory that fosters the culture of peace and nonviolence to prevent conflict and help learners build resilience. Buddhism is a religion, a belief, philosophy, and spiritual practice that's based on Buddha's teachings. Now, finally, filial piety. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys must be wondering what filial piety is. It's a virtue of respecting one's parents, elders, and ancestors. So basically, it's respecting your parents, understanding your parents' love. You always remind yourself that your parents sacrifice a lot for you, so you try to behave nice and respect them. Although it stems from Confucianism and Buddhism, and it's one of the most important values in Korea, it's not only an Asian value. I believe it's a universal thing. You know, you behave well to your parents. You want to respect them. You understand their love and sacrifice. So that global term of filial piety is the key term of this study. So this section is literature review. I did an extensive research on how other literatures and how other scholars studied how filial piety impacted other people's lives. Theoretical framework I use for this study is self-determination theory. It's a theory saying that people's choices are connected to intrinsic motivation without external interference, meaning that if you have higher self-determination, that leads to a higher motivation, and that generates a high life satisfaction. I believe that theoretical framework is connected to filial piety, because if you tend to have a higher sense of filial piety, you have a higher sense of autonomy and independence, which means that you have a higher life satisfaction. So this study has been supported by Page and Sons research titled Relations Between Dual Filial Piety and Life Satisfaction. In her study, it's been beautifully presented that she studied 300 Chinese students, and she observed how students who had higher sense of filial piety, they want to satisfy their parents' expectation. They want to make their family happy, and also they want to make their lives to be happy as well, and they want to feel confident about their life choices as well. So if you have a higher sense of filial piety, you become more independent and you become a more autonomous person. So I found that research aligns a lot with my research I did with North Korean defectors. And surprisingly, I found out that filial piety is valued in many cultures, in diverse cultural groups, such as Israel, China, Australia, New Zealand, United States, and many other Western countries. So it was good to see how filial piety is valued in many other countries. And that was the key term of literature review. So based on that studies and theoretical framework, I studied how would they impact in my own country? How would North Korean defectors shape their lives after learning religious teachings? So before jumping onto that, let me give you a brief background about Buddhist resettlement program. First of all, if North Korean defectors escape the country, North Korea, obviously. And then if they come to South Korea, they are required to enroll in this public institution. So what they do is that they are required to go through this 3 months mandatory resettlement education training program. So throughout this dormitory life, they live in a dorm for 3 months. They learn everything about how to survive in South Korea. So they learn Korean history, Korean literature, Korean culture, South Korean dialects. They learn how to use internet. They learn how to open a bank account, how to use public transportation, how to find a job, how to look for schools and stuff. So this 3 months mandatory resettlement education program is like a resettlement survival package for North Korean defectors. And surprisingly, it's very interesting to see every Sundays, these North Korean defectors are able to participate in religious activities. So they get to choose either participate in Catholic groups or Christian groups or Buddhist groups. And I chose Buddhist groups for this study. Why? Because I'm Buddhist. I grew up in a Buddhist family, and the majority, more than 90% of the current literature studies about Christian groups. So Catholic groups and Christian groups, they've been doing a lot of job in missionary support and refugee relief for North Korean defectors, but there's a very small study done that is outside of Christianity. So I was like, why don't I just take a chance? And I really want to dig into this program. So that's how I found out the public institution. I will not say the name of it because of the security reason. So I will just say out as a public institution. So after these North Korean defectors graduate from public institution, now they're free to go. They can go out to South Korea. They can do whatever they want, basically. And throughout the country, there are many Buddhist temples, and these independent temples also run Buddhist resettlement programs, not only for North Korean defectors, but also other emotionally healing kind of workshops, such as mindfulness and stuff. They teach those stuff for marginalized groups. So these North Korean defectors choose to continue participating in these temples, even after graduating from public institutions. So with the collaboration of these two research sites, the public institution and independent temples, I did research on how they teach filial piety and many Buddhist values to these refugee vulnerable population. They use a variety of materials, but I focused on this one material called Filial Piety Sutra. It's an ancient Buddhist script talking about filial piety, of course, and they talk about how you can behave well and how can repay your love towards your family and your parents. So it's kind of like an ancient kind of etiquette book. And North Korean defectors learned this, and South Korean monks have been passionately teaching this. Aside from traditional kind of classroom one-way teacher to student format, also these programs run fun activities for North Korean defectors to help them stay engaged in the community and feel more motivated to South Korea and all these Buddhist terms, because of course, filial piety, Buddhism, religion, democracy, everything is so new to these people for North Korean defectors. So how these monks and program facilitators crafted this program is they joined class materials, but also fun activities. So the example is community service, meditation, Buddhist art sessions. They also have cooking classes. They sing together. They do tea ceremony every month. They also do many other emotional healing workshops. And that was a very interesting curriculum that I looked into. So I hope every one of you guys understand what program that is. Now, methodology part. So I did qualitative methods for this research. I did semi-structured in-depth interviews with 2 South Korean monks and 3 South Korean program facilitators. And secondly, I did survey questionnaires with 20 North Korean defectors. Now, the reason why I did surveys for North Korean defectors, I'm sure you guys noticed that I have 2 different methodologies. It's because of security reasons. North Korean defectors are at high risk of exposing their profile to the public. They feel extremely insecure. They feel very anxious about the fact that they escaped North Korea. And once it's out in the public, they feel scared because they have families back in North Korea and they don't want to get exposed, especially to strangers. I was strangers for them. So in order to disconnect the data and their profile, I did survey for them. It was very successful. So the North Korean defectors felt really, really comfortable filling out their surveys rather than one-on-one interviews. And the return rate was 100%. I was able to get all the data sent back from the 20 North Korean defectors. On the other hand, I did very in-depth interviews with the monks and South Korean program facilitators for the whole year. I did monthly follow-ups and stuff, so that was very successful as well. Lastly, I did participant observation. I was able to actually get into the public institution. I visited all the temples and I participated in those Buddhist programs. And then I watched how the monks, the program facilitators, and how the North Korean defectors interact to each other, how they teach Buddhism, and how North Korean defectors perceive Buddhism. So that was a very effective methodology for this study. So what did I find out in this study? I have 3 big takeaways for this study. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, filial piety was taught in a variety of project-based pedagogy, meaning that filial piety in these programs were not taught in a one-way kind of traditional teacher to student kind of method. Like, this is filial piety, you guys need to memorize. That was not the case. It was more like a fun and engaging project-based pedagogy. And this was very effective for, especially for North Korean defectors, because they were able to naturally absorb the Buddhist terms, filial piety, even democracy, and all the new terms and ideologies, and adapt those values into their lives by doing fun activities like community service or tea ceremony, meditation, group meditation together. And so this project-based pedagogy was very successful. And I believe that this pedagogy would be very effective outside of North Korean defector communities, in refugee communities in other countries. And that was the first takeaway. And secondly, North Korean defectors were able to utilize their filial minds as a source of building autonomous life. So this means that when I visited the temples and carrying out my study, I realized that many North Korean defectors were suffering from homesickness and deep sense of guilt, because a lot of them left their parents behind in the country, or even they lost their family during their escape journey, which is very tragic. And even if they come to South Korea and become successful, they're not happy, and they blame themselves, and they keep saying, oh, why did I come here? I miss my parents. I'm such a bad daughter, or I'm such a bad son. I feel really bad. And then these North Korean defectors suffer from that deep sense of guilt throughout their whole time in South Korea, which hinders so much them from building a new life and successfully adjusting in South Korea. So this is when religious groups step in. How this is when Buddhism comes in and monks say, hey, you guys, I understand it's devastating. I understand it's heartbreaking, but you guys need to be more independent, happy about your life, build a new life, become more successful at your new place. And that's the true way of practicing filial piety, rather than just missing your parents all day and just sinking in that sadness all day. That doesn't help at all. So the true way of practicing filial piety is living your own life, become more independent, lead your own life, start a new chapter. That's the true way of practicing filial piety, and that's probably what your parents want you to do. So these kind of messages are so, it's kind of a wake-up call for them. So North Korean defectors feel so comfortable, like these words were comforting for them. And I found that the Buddhist teachings of filial piety aligns a lot with the purpose of peace education, because in the end, it's about finding peace, and you need to overcome your own obstacles deep inside you. So I found that aligns with filial peace education. That connects to learning about the principles of filial piety console the North Korean defectors' melancholy minds of missing their parents, yes, and also North Korean defectors were able to learn the root cause of their conflicts and find inner peace through learning filial piety. So when I met North Korean defectors and also did interviews with South Korean monks, I learned that these North Korean defectors have that deep inner conflicts deep inside them. For instance, female defectors, they were victims of rape, sex trafficking, sex crime, and for instance, children, they saw their parents get shot by Chinese police officers right in front of them, or like the North Korean soldiers, they caught their parents and took them back to their prison camp. So these children become orphans instantly, and they came back to South Korea. So even though they successfully escaped the country and came to South Korea, still they always suffer from their inner conflicts, and they don't know how to handle those conflicts. So majority of them become extremely angry against to themselves or their new lives, or become pessimistic, extremely depressed. So by learning filial piety, not only filial piety, but Buddhism in general, they have many social emotional healing components like mindfulness, meditation, inner peace, and so forth. By learning these religious values, these defectors were able to learn how to deal with their inner conflicts. And that also aligns with the purpose of peace education, because peace education not only teaches how to handle your outer conflicts, but also it's a way of learning how to be resilient and deal with your inner conflicts as well. Especially right now, like COVID-19 pandemic, I think that's really important for everyone, for us to learn how to be resilient at your place and find inner peace and deal with your inner conflicts. So I thought that is a really big takeaway I learned from this study. So this is going to be my last session. I would like to briefly discuss about this study and talk about limitations and wrap up this presentation. So filial piety can be a promising tool for peace education in terms of family bonding, inner peace, conflict resolution, and many other social-emotional healing pedagogy. When I was studying peace education, I realized that the majority of them are coming from the Western school of thoughts, which is true. It's from the Western thinking philosophy, but I believe that there are many common peace education kind of elements in the East side too. So I think this study can be a great place to discuss, bringing all the discussions from both from the West and the East side, the Asian side, so we can have a more open-minded and global discussion from all around the world, talking about peace education. So I hope everyone can also learn about Asian values of peace education. I am very proud of my study. I'm very happy about it, but of course it's not perfect all the time. There is always a limitation. 20 North Korean defectors may not represent the whole population. Yes, it is true. However, the research has a high value on rare data collected from North Koreans. So as a scholar, it was really hard. It was a big challenge to have an access to North Korean defectors because they are in a very special position. They're out of many marginalized groups and vulnerable groups. Technically, Korea is still in a war, so it's really hard to have access to them. So in order to protect their confidentiality, it was inevitable for me to knock the door every time, hey, can I do research and stuff? So it was a big challenge. And that's why there's a very small study done about the lives of North Korean defectors. So I would propose that in the future, bigger sample size would be better. However, this study might shed lights on the understudied area of Korean studies, religion, but even peace education. So 20 is not bad, I think. So yeah, that was my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you guys can have a very peaceful day. I would like to wrap it up with my favorite quote from Buddha: peace comes from within, do not seek it without. Thank you.